As well, normally we are in Indianapolis. It just so happens that we have to make reservations a year or two in advance, and we could not get our hotel that we normally got.
So normally you and everybody who's...
Normally we would be there on the 30th, but we had to choose the week before or a week later, and so we were there the 24, 5, 6, and 7.
Sure. When you're there, kind of what sort of things do you talk about, think about, experience in terms of...
Well, of course, we are there primarily for the purpose of getting back together. We 36 that are still living, but there were only 13 of us there, and so everything nearly is built around us. However, there's programs, in fact, too many programs, and then they had me to speak then on Friday night.
Why do you guys like to get back together?
Why
is that
do?
important?
Well, you know, I guess it's hard to say, but it would be like kinfolks, we survivors. You'd have to see us. I mean, we're together when we're there. Anything that's being done there, usually it's around us. We're in the front seat every place and so on, and it's the camaraderie, and it's not so much talking about what happened out there, unless someone maybe is asking us questions, and then most everyone was at a different place, because if 900 of us got in the water, and at the end of 4.5 days there's only 317 still alive to be rescued, then all of us maybe have a little different story, in that some may have been, a few may have been in a life raft, a few maybe were in a floater net, and many of them otherwise were kind of adrift in a kapok life jacket. And a kapok life jacket won't hold you out of the water for 4.5 days.
So it brought you guys, it made you family.
It made us family, right. And when I spoke the other day, I said, our experience in the water, it made us better men. But all of us have a little different experience because, well, as I mentioned earlier, I'm in a group of 80, and many were injured. I had 2 other Marines in my group. One didn't make it 2 hours. He pretty much died, me holding on to him, trying to comfort, I think he'd been blown against a bulkhead and multiple breaks in his body. The other Marine had gone in the water head first, and half an inch of that old black oil, and he went into head first in that. Now, how do you get that out of your eyes? You don't. I mean, you try to rub it out, and then that salt water, now you look up at that sun, it becomes powder, and he had a miserable time. Got to where he could nearly not see at all, but he made it nevertheless.
Let's talk about, as you said, you volunteered when you were 18 to go fight in World War II. Talk to me about why you did that, and sort of your experience getting assigned to this massive cruiser here.
Okay, when I was 18, yes. My number I knew was going to come up soon over at Murray, Kentucky, and I go to the draft board and say, I don't want to be drafted. I'd like to get in the Marine Corps, and my number hasn't come up yet. And I remember the lady looking at another and said, this young man, you know, he wants to get in the Marine Corps. And they talked, and they said, well, we've got room to call some more up in July. And so they said, okay, we'll call you up in July. And then from there I went to Evansville, Indiana, and passed the physical. And when I said I wanted the Marines, they said, you have to go to Indianapolis. I go to Indianapolis, my first time ever, you know, there, and I was sworn in the Marine Corps, and then they sent me home for a few days, and then I show up in San Diego boot camp. After boot camp, then sea school, and after sea school, they sent me up to San Francisco, and there's the big USS Indianapolis
and that's to be my home for the rest of the war.
What was it like living on that ship?
Oh, well, it was I have to say, is a different experience. But there were 39 of we Marines. I'm part of ship's company, and we have specific duties aboard. Not right off, but I was a captain's orderly much of the time. Got very well acquainted with Captain McVeigh. I mean, no buddy stuff. In fact, I never laid a hand on him, but I saluted him many times and showed my respect and all to him so much. But then we manned 5-inch anti-aircraft guns, 40-millimeter anti-aircraft guns, and we had charge of all the pulleys and the brigs and all that.
So I want to talk to you about the mission that eventually led to the sinking. But
yes.
You played a key role in World War II, taking the components of the atom bomb to where I guess they were eventually assembled and then loaded on to the bombers. Is that
right? Right.
Did you know that's what you were doing
no.
at the time?
It was on July 16, 1945. We looked out on the dock at San Francisco. We had just come from a little earlier than that. We were at Okinawa. We'd received a kamikaze plane there. We had to come back to the States for repair. And after repair were done, then here we are. We're in port, and they needed a fast ship to take a cargo to Tinian, our B-29 base. We had the least idea what was coming aboard our ship. I saw that crane reach over on the dock and pick it up and set it on the quarterdeck, and then they rolled it into the port hangar deck, and my Marine captain said, "Harrell, I want you to station a guard that big box." Captain Parks, "What are we guarding?" He said, "We don't know. Don't know what we're guarding?" He said, "No, Captain McVeigh doesn't know what it is. We only know that every hour that we delay in getting it to the forward area would cost lives." Well, that tells us we got a hot potato. And then there were a couple of proposed to be Air Force officers that came aboard, and they had a little canister in a metal cage with a padlock on it, and it looked a little odd. Air Force people and whatever they had, and a couple of sailors put a rod kind of in that, put it on their shoulders, took it up to the forward area, and our ship was a flagship of Admiral Spruance, and he was not aboard, so there was extra rooms or space. And so those two men went in there, and with that little container, and a couple of sailors came up soon with a piece of metal, and they welded that to the deck over that and spot welded it and says, "Whatever happens to whatever, don't allow that to get away." Well, long story, that was half all the uranium that America owned at that time. We didn't know that. We didn't know who those Air Force officers were either, but they were scientists from Los Alamos, New Mexico, going along with what we had in the big crate and the uranium that we didn't know what we had. And we made a record speed run from San Francisco to Tinian Island, some 5,300 miles. We made that in 10 days, 530, 40 miles a day in a heavy cruiser. Unloaded our cargo, still did not know what we had. Now, I have to say, off the record or on the record, I question seriously that McVeigh did not know that. I have to think, I know President Truman and even Churchill knew that we were waiting for July 1645, our test in Los Alamos, New Mexico, and that happened that morning on the 16th. And the picture that I was showing you there, they say that there's where we were, and had that not been successful, we would not have proceeded. But that was successful, and I've read something recently that the kind of the officer of that mission goes to Captain McVeigh after a period of time. He said, "Captain, we are doing 32, 33 knots, and we know we've got something hot that we're to take, and if we continue on at this rate, we're going to burn up our motors, and we cannot deliver." And McVeigh answered him and said, continue, same speed.
So you saw that conversation?
Yeah, we know that conversation.
So
well,
you delivered the package?
Yes, we
you
delivered.
Still didn't know what it was?
We delivered that, and since our ship was the flagship of Admiral Spruance, and his crew were not aboard, but he was very much around, and so we stop at Guam. We call that CENPAC, Central Pacific Command in Guam, and Captain McVeigh asked for his sailing orders, and they tell him that you're to go to the Philippines to prepare for the main invasion of Japan, which we would have landed 2 million troops or so on one of the big islands of Japan, and Great Britain would have done about 1 million. And so it would have been an Iwo Jima 1,000 times over had we done that. But that wasn't required of us. But Captain McVeigh asked his sailing orders, yes, go to the Philippines to prepare for the main invasion of Japan. Okay, we head out. He asked for an escort, and they tell him, you don't need an escort. But they were not telling the truth. They could have said, you need an escort because 4 days ago we lost the USS Underhill and we lost 129 boys, but they don't tell him that. They could have said, you need an escort, you do not have underwater sound gear, and we know that the Taman group of submarines are working in those waters, but they don't tell him that. And they tell him you can zigzag at your discretion. Now, in the daytime, you're going to zigzag, your discretion says. Yes, we zigzag in the daytime. But at night, if it's sufficiently dark, you do not zigzag. And so the gentleman that I was rescued with at the last, he was the officer of the deck the night before, and he sent word to the captain permission to cease zigzagging at the change of the watch. And he told me, I was in the water with him, he said that, and Captain McVeigh said they looked and decided it was sufficiently dark. He said at the change of the watch, permission granted, cease zigzagging. So we are not zigzagging. And it's quite dark. When I got off a watch that night, it was dark. I was out at different times doing different things. I'm kind of the corporal of the guard, so I'm all over the ship there when my watch was on until 12.
And you said around when the attack happened, you were sleeping on the front part of the deck.
Right. Yeah. And about 14 minutes past midnight, Commander Hoshimoto sees that he's got a target, and he tells the crew to stand by. He even had what they call a Gallatin, which would be 2 boys in a torpedo what am I trying to say? Anyway, it's a torpedo with 2 men in it, and it's radioed or it's controlled. They can control it. The only thing, once they're fired, they cannot be recovered. And 2 were in one, but 6 torpedoes were loaded. And Commander Hoshimoto, I have his book, Sunk, and he says that stand by, fire, and every 2 seconds, he fires a torpedo. Well, we don't know which of the 6 hit us, but in a spread, the first one hit the bow of the ship and cut about 35, 40 feet of the bow off. The second one back close to the marine compartment, no doubt a big gaping hole there, but no one lived to tell the story from there.
What do you remember about the impact? Did it wake you up?
Oh, you bet it woke me up. I've got a picture of the ship over there as it appeared the moment that it was hit, and a massive fire from that first explosion. And you could just imagine, if it cut the bow of the ship off, it had to be pretty powerful. And then the second explosion, then the second torpedo after me, well, I guess in yardage, 50, 60 yards back, the second torpedo. And then the third major explosion was a magazine under what we call number 2 turret, which was 3 big 8-inch guns. And so a massive explosion there that comes through the top of that turret. And now from there, I realized that I could hear the bulkheads breaking below. I know the ship is doomed. And so I'm making my way back to my emergency station, which is I'm to meet my lieutenant, my Marine lieutenant, there to tell me what I'm to do under those emergency conditions. But as I started aft, I'm going by compartments where there's officers' quarters on the open deck forward, or main deck, and there were officers coming out, and they were in their night skivvies, and many of them were flash burned because they're in between the two major explosions. And I saw them pleading for someone to give them some assistance. And they were flesh hanging partially. They were burned, or if they touched the bulkhead, a hot bulkhead with their hand, making their way out into the open, they left the skin of the hand on the bulkhead. So they are in a pitiful situation. But my duty calls me to rush to my emergency station to receive orders. And before I could get to the quarterdeck, I realized I don't have a life jacket. And I could hear the bulkheads down below breaking, and metal, noise, and even the ship is already taking on so much water in the forward area that you know that it's doomed. And then that second torpedo then taking on so much water that the deck of the ship is listing to where it's difficult even to stand on the deck. By the time I get to the quarterdeck, I realize I don't have a life jacket. My life jacket is down in the Marine compartment locked up in my locker. And my Marine lieutenant was there, and I see all those big canvas bags, new supply of Kapok life jackets. Lieutenant Stauffer, permission to cut down some of those life jackets. And his response was, not until we get word to abandon ship. Well, I had just come from the forward area, and by now, nearly the deck was partly submerged in that first 100 yards. Now, it's twice the length football field, 610 feet long. And even by now, we are listing to the starboard so much that normally the quarterdeck would be 8 feet above the water line. There's water on the quarterdeck. And I knew I'd just come from forward area. And there was a Navy commander that came through the hatch, and as he came through, I could see that he was flash burned severely. And some sailor hollered out, "Get the commander a life jacket." And so they began to cut those down, and I managed to reach in and get me a life jacket. And I oftentimes, as I speak, I say to people, you may not know what an old Kapok life jacket is. Do you know what a horse collar is? I said, it's like a horse collar made out of a Kapok, a flotation device, made into a vest, and you put that on. And I said, I put that on, but I didn't fasten it in the straddle because I knew that I'm going to be jumping off the ship soon, or else the ship is going to leave me. Well, all PA system is out. All electrical power is out. And so we were desperate, waiting for word. And Captain McVeigh had sent someone below deck to kind of take inventory to see if the ship was salvageable. But anyone that he sent below, I think he says later, they never made it back out. And so we're waiting desperately.
On the deck.
Yeah, we're waiting there on the quarterdeck. Now, a minute, or half a minute seems like, a long, long time when you see that the ship is going down. And finally word trickled down, and I can hear it now. It was like an echo, abandon ship, abandon ship, abandon ship, abandon ship, louder and louder as it got. And we nearly knew where it was coming from. And so now, what do? Well, you're looking at the high side, on the port side, and I can see that big steel cable there, and everyone's rushing to that. Some were climbing over, and by now the deck of the ship and the keel of the ship is nearly one as level as the other, so we climb over that rail. But as I looked out into the blackness of the night, I was scared to death. And really, as I looked out, I thought, this is the end of life. Life is over. And I often say there's times when you pray, and there's times when you pray, and
there is a difference, and I poured my heart out to the Lord and tell him I don't want to die. I want to live. I tell him that I've got mom and dad back home, 6 younger brothers, an older sister, a younger sister, and a certain brunette, the same one that said that she would wait for me, and she waited for me. We were married in 47, and 3 days ago, on the 25th, was our 67th wedding anniversary. But anyway, I'm telling the Lord all of those things, and let me just say this. There was no response back to me in an audible form, but there was a voice speaking to me from Scripture that I knew. I was a believer, and I could hear, I'll never leave you nor forsake you. Peace I give unto you, not as the world giveth, give unto you. Let not your hearts be troubled. Don't be afraid. And I'm scared to death. But with those thoughts running through my mind, I just knew that somehow, some way, I'm being told that I'm going to make it. Now, I didn't know I'm going to be out there 4.5 days. And so I climb over that rail, and basically I walked down the keel of the ship 2 steps, then jumped into the water feet first, and my kapok jacket then came up over my head, and I know I've got to get my head above that oil, and I'm desperate to try to get my head above the oil. Well, I don't get completely out of the oil. I'm covered with oil, but at least I didn't maybe get it too much in my nose or in my mouth. And then I began to plug away and get away from the ship to see that the nose is under, see the fantail coming high in there. I could see those big screws turning, and from down below I could look up, and there's a little silhouette of light coming out from the explosions above. And I could see light. I could see boys jumping any place that they could get off, and some jumped into those screws. Now, up there, they're looking down at the blackness of the night. There's no lights down there, and they couldn't see. And then I'm desperate then to get away from the ship, and I saw her when she went completely under, and that fantail was the last thing that went down. It turned to the starboard nose down, and I thought, I can't stay close enough. I'm trying to get away, but it's going down.
Did it kind of suck you towards
it? Did not. That's what I was afraid of. But I often say, different ones say, did it have any suction? I said, no. With the bow cut off and all that water coming in, and now it's sinking, where does that air in the ship go? It got to be forced out. And what I could hear and see was the bubbles coming to the surface rather than a suck.
What was that first night like? Did you sleep?
Well, the first night we lost several boys. Many didn't have life jackets, and some had been injured, like the one Marine buddy of mine. So some didn't make it the first night. But the first morning, we had company. When I say it, any time nearly that first morning, you could look out and you could see a big fin cutting through the water. Now, in fairness to the sharks, they were not attacking us, but you can imagine what that's doing to you. And so we are trying to stay together, to stay in a group and not allow anyone to get out straggling and so on. But it isn't long till maybe he's been injured, maybe he has a temperature, he's hallucinating, he can imagine, he sees all kinds of things out there. He can see an oasis, he can see another ship, and in some cases they could even see our ship down below, and maybe they would swim away from the group, and then you'd hear a blood-curdling scream, and you'd look, and you see that kapok go under, and the fins around all the blood, and you dare not to go and check to see who your buddy might have been because of the sharks. So you wait, but sometime later, maybe you're anxious to know who that might have been, and so you check him later, and you find out maybe the bottom torso is gone or is disemboweled, and so we're going to experience that many times.
So that happened many times over that 4 days. Somehow,
that's right.
Someone would get.
Yes.
The sharks never attack the whole group.
Never. No, they may. There's times when maybe your fin would swim through and they didn't attack anyone. Now, why? I'm just thankful they didn't me. But
were some of the other challenges people faced? You said some guys had oil, some guys were burned, some guys had oil in their eyes.
Yes. Well, and guys that were burned, soon that flesh now in that oil and in that salt water and dehydration of the body, that's going to begin to deteriorate. And where you rub your arms under your armpits and where your kapok jackets rubbed you, then that gets infected, and frankly, it just rots off. And once it comes off, it's deep enough that you bleed. Now, I kept mine on pretty much until I'm in the hospital, and then they cleaned me off and so on. But that's kind of ahead of where we are here. But
what was the hardest part for you those 4 days?
Well, the hardest part, I think, would be the second day. If you can see yourself in 100, maybe 110 degree weather, bareheaded and swimming nearly constantly, and you see boys that would dare to drink some salt water and see what's happening to them, tear off some of their clothing and take a piece of cloth and put that salt water up there and put your head under it and drink some of that. And within the hour, on a dehydrated body, I mean, he's out of it. He doesn't know you from Adam. In some cases, he thinks you're a Jap, or in some cases, he thinks you have a canteen of water in your kapok jacket, and he takes out his sheath knife, and he goes at you with vengeance, and blood. So many things like that are taking place. But you are desperate for water. Your lips are swollen, they're cracked open, and the salt water in that, and they're bleeding, and you are desperate for water. Your tongue now is beginning to swell in your mouth, and you have trouble of talking even.
Is that second day you're
That's the second day. And it was sometime the afternoon of the second day, we are desperate for water, and then look, and we see a little rain cloud coming over. Look, it's raining. And you can see that little rain cloud getting closer and closer. Well, what do? I'll tell you what you do. You hold your mouth heavenward, and that rain kind of washes some of that oil off, and you drink some of that, and later you regurgitate some of that, but you take those greasy hands and you funnel some of that water. I mean, it's precious, but maybe you upchuck some of that too, but that's all the water that I had for 4.5 days. And then it was sometime then, okay, let me just run on through to the third day. The second day, that is kind of a highlight, so to speak, rain cloud that comes over. And the third day at noon, there's only 17 of us. Now, you would just ask, well, what all has happened? Well, dehydration, mass hallucination, sharks, boys just give up. I saw boys, I often say, it's much easier to die than it is to live. You've got to work to live, but you can just give up. That old kapok jacket by the third day at noon, it won't hold your head out of the water. I mean, it does, but you've really got to help it all that you can because you're just sunk down too much.
You're paddling the whole time, right? You never stop.
No.
So you don't sleep.
No. Well, I think there's times when you just give out because you can't just continue to swim all the time. But here, the third day at noon, only 17 of us. And we are kind of grouped together, and we look at... Right.
There were probably different groups, because there were a couple hundred of you that survived. But in your group...
Yeah, just my group of 17. Okay, and we are saying, we're just falling by the way every little bit. And we were just debating, what can we do? We aren't going to make it unless help can come. We see planes flying over 30,000 feet bombing Tokyo, but no one's looking for us. And so we're desperate. And
by now we take off our kapok jackets and we are seated in them.
Because there's enough left over.
Yeah, and so by seating in them, you know, your own body will float a little bit, you know, and with a little help from the kapok, now you're still having to swim to keep your head above the water. And if you don't keep plugging, then that kapok then will pitch you, and you don't have the strength hardly to get that back down under you.
How many were in your group initially, do you think?
Initially, my group was about 80. And we did not know that maybe 900 of us maybe were in the water out there someplace. But most of them weren't faring much better than any other group, other than maybe some that were in a floater net. They had something to kind of protect them maybe from the sharks a little bit. And a few of them had a little raft, and they didn't fare so much, because if they ran into anyone that didn't have a raft, you know, I mean, there's a fight to get on and get off, you know, and so many of those didn't fare so well either. But anyway, here we are. We are desperate there that third day. And like I said maybe earlier, there's times when you pray and there's times when you pray. And I can hear that one old sailor now. He says, God, if you're out there, I don't want to die. I've got a son back home I've never seen, and we have to have help or we aren't going to make it. And so we are struggling and we are praying. And then after a period of time, we're up on a maybe 10, 12 foot, no, 8 or 10 foot swell or so in the daytime. They're down 4 or 5 at night. But we look out and we said, look, looks like a raft out there. And of course, you can holler on the water and it carries pretty good. And they responded. And after a period of time, they got close enough. We could see his little makeshift of a raft, but no one was on the raft. And they got close enough. We could see that there were 5 sailors around it. And they're coming into our group, and naturally we're going toward them too. And we meet up then, and they say, we've got to get close enough to the Philippines that someone will spot us, or else we aren't going to make it. And then we saw what that raft had on it. They had taken kapok jackets off of boys that had already expired, and like an old sponge, it won't hold any more water, but if you squeeze it out, it'll hold some more water for a period of time. And they'd taken kapok jackets off of boys that had already gone, and maybe taken their dog tags, and then they commit them to the sea. They have their jackets, they put them up on that little raft. Now they came into our group, and anyone want to join us? We've got to get closer to the Philippines, and we're going to push this raft. We're going to head in that direction. Well, I say to my Marine buddy Spooner, I'm going to go with him. He said, Harrell, if you go, I'm going with you. So 2 Marines joined 5 sailors. We think we're going to go to the Philippines. We didn't know it was another 500 miles, but we could see that we've got spare life jackets. And so anyway, we joined them, and we say farewell to our other buddies. And here we are, armed upon that old crate, and we're making our way. Well, sometime later that afternoon, we could see, the sun goes down in the west, and the Philippines is in the west there someplace. But how far is it? We had the foggiest idea, and we're struggling, and we're making some progress because we left our buddies. But again, later in the afternoon, we came upon a swell, and I said, look, there's some debris out there. Well, it's up and we're down and up and down, and finally we could see it. And I said, maybe just an old crate or something, but I'm going to swim out and get it. And they say, a shark might get you too. Well, we haven't seen sharks around us, at least at that time. And there was kind of a compelling influence, say, go and see what might be in that crate. And I have my kapok jacket on now to where I can swim. I'd been seated in it, but I'm plugging away, and I get closer and closer and closer, and I get 6 feet or so from that old potato crate, and I see those potatoes floating there in that, in desperation, I'm reaching for that first potato. As I got that first potato, kind of in the agony of defeat, it was solid on the inside, but it was rotten on the outside. And all that rot squeezed through my fingers, and I thought, rotten potatoes, and I peeled that with my hands, and I peeled it with my teeth somewhat, and it was solid on the inside. And then I peeled off several of those and put them in my pocket, and then began to swim back to my buddies then, and they see that, maybe I had something. What is it? Rotten potatoes, but they left the raft, and they came and joined me. And all we had to eat, was half-rotten potatoes, but we got a fill of half-rotten potatoes. And then, at night now it's calmed down. The seas are much quieter, but it's dark. And we could see, there's no moon, and you can't see a Southern Cross anymore. And so later on that night, it's foolish just to keep swimming when you don't know which way you're going. And so we're just hanging on to that raft. And then we hear voices, and we respond, they back to us, and it isn't long until the Navy Lieutenant Charles McKissick from Texas. I knew aboard ship. Oftentimes, I'm the captain's orderly, and he was the officer of the deck, so he was a peach of a guy. And so anyway, he's leading some boys. Now, as they came in, I really don't know how many. I think might have been 4 or 5, could have even been 6, because it might be a half a minute or 2 minutes apart. They're struggling to come in. And they came in, and there was a Marine that had a pocket full of half-rotten potatoes in his pocket, and he shared those with McKissick and the other boys that were with him. And then we tell him that we have spare life jackets here that are drier than what you are wearing, and we showed them how they could take theirs off and take one that has a little more buoyancy to it, and then a couple of guys would twist those in opposite directions and squeeze them out pretty good and pitch them up on that little raft.
So it was the next day you were rescued. Could you talk to me a little bit about that? How did that go down?
Okay.
What was that like?
Okay. The next day is the 4th day. The next day, I'm not with the raft. I'm not with my buddy Spooner. I'm with that Lieutenant McKissick. What has happened, I don't know. Somehow or another, in the quietness of the night, with a change maybe in a life jacket, whether or not we are drifting away from that, but we got separated. And I'm with McKissick and one sailor. And I checked that one sailor because I could see what I'd seen many times. And he dropped his head in the water, and I go over and shook him, and he responded, but he could care less. And the second time, the same thing. The third time is too late. So it's just McKissick and myself. And now we're seated in our capon jackets again. And we see planes at 30,000 feet, but all of a sudden, I hear a plane. Look, I see a plane. Look, there's a plane. And sure enough, there's a plane maybe up, 3,000 or 4,000 feet, but you could see him, and he's going to come directly over. So what do? Well, I don't know whether I hollered at him or I waved, I splashed water, and I think, all of a sudden I said, look, he sees us, he's coming in. Thank you, Lord. Thank you. Look, he's coming in. And he was coming in. But let me take you up there. Lieutenant Gwynn flying that Ventura, I call it a B-25, a twin-engine plane with wheels. He's out on a search and destroy mission, and he was having problems with his radio antenna. That little antenna that trails behind that, the sock on that or the stabilizer had come off, and he says to the co-pilot, take over control. I'm going to go aft and pull in this antenna and see if I can't get a stabilizer on it, or else we can't reach back at base. And as he goes aft, he opens the bomb bay door, and he looks down, just glanced down, just at a flash, and he saw something. What he saw was an oil slick. And he rushes back to take over control, and the crew says, what is it? And basically he says to them, look down there. But he's taken over control. Load the bombs, literally load the bombs. Now, let me take you back up there. He was flying at 4,000 feet. he's looking forward of him, let's say 4 miles. He's looking at his peripheral vision, 2.5 miles each side, 20 square mile, and to see a man's head down there 6 to 8 inches, impossible. But in the providence of God, he saw us. He saw the oil slick. I see him, I think, look, he sees us, he's coming in. Thank you, Lord. And he was coming in. He was coming in on a bombing run until he got down 2,000 feet and less, and then all of a sudden he saw debris. He saw boys. He saw sharks. He saw sharks attacking boys. Not at first when he came down, but after a period of time, he's down. He can't land. And I see him today as he circled McKissick and myself several times. I can see his visage in that cockpit. And he was saying, I know you're down there. I can't land. And then he leaves and he goes back up maybe 3,000-4,000 feet. And he reaches then back in Pellew to announce ducks on the pond. No one knew who we were. But at least he reaches back to Pellew. And Adrian Marks, in a PBY pilot, picked up our code out there, and so he's ready to get in his PBY and go out on a search and destroy. But there's boys out there having problems with sharks, and so here he makes his way. They make contact then, and Gwynn stays to direct Marks. And as Marks is coming out, he goes over the USS Doyle and tells them then that there's boys scattered all over everywhere. And so the Doyle, then he puts it in high gear. He's coming. Then Gwynn has to tell Marks, I've got to go back to Pellew. I'm running out of fuel. I just have enough to get me back to Pellew. Marks then comes on the scene. And first thing that he sees is sharks attacking boys. He said at one time he saw about 30 boys and more than 30 sharks. And they were having a heyday. And he radios back then to Pellew, asks permission to do a no-no, and that would be to set a PBY down in an open sea landing. And they tell him no way, because it probably was 8 10-foot swells, at least 6 or 8.
Sorry, I'm a little confused. The guy coming to get you, he's in a ship, right? There's a guy up circling in a plane.
There's one in the plane, but a PBY.
I don't know what that is.
Okay, that is a twin engine.
So they're both
I've got it down there.
So they're both in planes.
Yeah, both planes, but one could land in the water. PBY, yes, could land in the water. So Mark's, they tell him no way, and he argues the point that boys down there are being mauled by sharks. And they still tell him, to do an open sea landing in a PBY in 8 or 10-foot swells, no way. But he hung up on his command in Pellew. He set that big goose down, and as he set it down, he hit that first swell, and it bounced up. Some says as much as 50 feet, but I think what I saw, 20 feet or so. He comes up and then back down, and now he picks up stragglers for as far as he could see. And then later I knew that he picked up McKissick that was with me. And now we're separated you're out there in the swells. You go one way and your buddy goes another. But anyway, I knew that he picked up McKissick, and then later they have to just run the swells. They can't turn that one, well, he tore up one engine, and he couldn't put that one prop against a bank of water, and so all he could do is run the swells. And then he picks up boys. He picks up 56 of us. Well, anyone knows anything about a PBY, I say, it won't hold 56. And I have to say, it will if you tie 7 out on the wings. And I told this story Friday night, and I looked over at my buddy from Chattanooga, and he was out on on the wings. And so anyway, they picked up 56 of us.
Were you one of them, though? That's what I was.
Sir?
Were you one of them that he
Yeah,
picked up?
yes, I
What
was one.
like when you got on that plane?
Well, they were just running the swell. They never stopped that plane. He could not stop it, and it turned sideways, and then that prop against that bank of water. And so they're there, and they grab me, they drag me over, they put me in the plane. Well, of course, you can't sit up. They just stack you in like a sack of feed. And I get in the plane, and I look, and I see my buddy Spooner. And he was the only one that I recognized. But then they picked up 56, but they could never take off. One motor, you know, but it isn't long until the Doyle is coming in. Now, when they picked up the first boy, USS Indianapolis, otherwise no one knew anything about the Indianapolis' demise out there. But the Doyle now is coming in. He happened to be a relative of McVeigh's, and so he's doing everything in his power to get there as fast as he could. And I see him that night when we shut the motor off on that one prop, and we have a little bit of lights, but very little. And then all of a sudden you could see outside, not vividly, but you could see outside. You could see lights. Well, it was Commander Clater in the Doyle. He turned on all of his lights underneath the clouds, and that was hope for the boys that are going to be out there another night. And then finally he comes on the scene. We're transferred then.
In the ship in this plane, like you stay on the plane's still in the water. Does a ship come and pick
Right. Yeah, the ship came close enough, and then he sends a boat over and picks us up. They put me in one of those stretchers and bring me over in a little motor whale boat, and then they drag me up vertical, not horizontal, you know, and then they clean me up with diesel fuel and so on. And then I hear noise, boom, and what is that? They just sank our aircraft that had picked us up because they could never take off again. And then they picked up a few more survivors there that they could find that night, but they dared not maneuver too much in that destroyer because the boys are scattered everywhere and debris is everywhere and it's dark. And so we make our way then to Paloux. I go to the hospital in Paloux 2 days later.
What kind of injuries did you have once you were in the hospital? I assume you were sunburned. What else did you have?
What kind of injuries?
Yeah.
Okay. I had this ear, which I had gotten just a little bit before at Okinawa, but I had saltwater ulcers all over me, and yes, sunburn, and you know, your dehydrated body. I mean, you're suffering from that. I think that I had lost, you know, over 25 pounds, and different ones would say, well, you couldn't lose that much. And then I had buddies that say, well, I lost 40 pounds. You know, they were much heavier than me. But
looking back on it, do you consider yourself lucky, blessed? What
well, I think it has to be more than luck. I have to say, I just felt all the way through that somehow, some way, the providence of God was watching over me and brought me through. Well, you know, at least I survived, and I'm here today, and I tell the story today. And in telling the story, I have to say that it wasn't that I was a Marine, or certainly wasn't that I was a good swimmer, because all I had, there was just no Kapok life jacket, and it won't last 4.5 days, but somehow, some way, I'm still alive at the end of 4.5 days. And so I just give credit to the Lord above that somehow, some way, he brought 317 of us through that.
I think that's all I need to ask you on anything